So welcome everybody to the WLI lecture, Placemaking in the Wake of COVID-19. I'm Nicole DiPietro, the manager of ULI Louisiana, and I'm excited to have everybody here to hear Sally talk about placemaking. So Sally, could you advance the slide? So just a little bit about what the Urban Land Institute is. Our mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and create sustaining and thriving communities worldwide. So how we do that is by convening people like this. Previously it was in person, but right now we are pivoting to virtual events. We are made up of developers, architects, engineers, contractors, like everybody in real estate. The Louisiana chapter has 277 members, and it is a worldwide organization with over 43,000 members. So we're excited to, and we want to thank our annual sponsors. We are a self-sustaining chapter and wouldn't be able to do anything without the resources given to us by our annual sponsors. So yeah, we thank you. And I'm going to introduce our speaker, Sally, who is a valued member of the ULI community. She's a graduate of Columbia University with a major in urban studies. She's the founder of the Big Easel Collective, which connects New Orleans artists to place-based businesses to design memorable installations. And she volunteers for everything I ever ask her to do. So she is currently the chair of our local product council. She's involved with our communications committee, our emerging trends program, our young leaders group, and the diversity committee. So she is a very valued part of the Urban Land Institute operation. So with that, I'll take Sally to take it over.
Yeah, so before I put on my official talk hat, I'll give a few plugs for ULI. We have some upcoming virtual events that we hope you'll check out. Some focus on economic development next week, as well as Urban Plan, which is another amazing program that teaches land use and real estate practices to young people in our community who might not know what a career in this field looks like. And then an initiative that we've been working on for a very long time and are super excited to launch. We're starting a book club with the ULI Triangle group, in which we'll be studying The Color of Law, which, as many of you know, in this moment has been a book that many folks have been referring to that talks about some of the discriminatory policies in housing and real estate. And so we think this is a great moment for us to get together and think critically about our history in this space. And so we hope you'll join us for this book club. Registration just opened yesterday. It's free to join for both members and non-ULI members, so check it out. And then I also run all of our social media on ULI, so please feel free to throw us a follow on these various platforms. We'd love to keep you guys in the loop about the great work that we're spearheading. All right, and with that, I'm going to transition back to the seminar. So thank you so much for joining me today on this topic of placemaking in the wake of COVID-19. I'm going to start by asking us all to take a collective deep breath in and deep breath out. It has been a very, very long year. 2020 started with bushfires in Australia. We almost went to war with Iran. We lost Kobe and Gigi Bryant. Brexit officially happened and took place. Black, brown, and trans individuals have had their lives tragically cut because of police brutality, and we're seeing a revolution in our streets, where leaders of color have galvanized hundreds of thousands of people around the world to speak out against injustice and inequity, to demand systemic change in response to hundreds of years of oppression, particularly towards people who are Black. And all of this is unfolding against a backdrop of a global pandemic, one that is absolutely merciless. It has stretched to every corner of our globe. So far, we've had confirmed over 8 million cases worldwide, and over 440,000 people have passed away as a result of coronavirus. Our hospital systems are overworked and filled to the brim, and many people are working long shifts all around the clock in order to meet our basic needs and provide health resources to members in our community. And we've lost so many humans through this experience with the coronavirus. In the United States, it's been over 100,000 people. And here's just a snapshot of 1,000 folks from a New York Times cover on May 24th. And each of these people are neighbors and musicians and friends and family members. And so, you know, the world seems incredibly bleak. And when we're taking in all of these stories and trying to stay up to date about everything that's going on, many of us are quarantining, which looks a lot like this. And the world is crumbling, and we're all doing our part, hoping that things will improve and get better, and just praying that we don't have a meteor come and attack Earth, or aliens land, or whatever else 2020 is going to throw our way. And, you know, for my millennial audience, this might resonate, but it's been a year filled with a lot of disappointment, and one that I'm sure we're all working through in our own ways. And while we've been reading the news and absorbing all of this information, we have not been doing a lot of this, which New Orleanians know as our bread and butter of enjoying the spring festival season. It's super sad to not be able to take place in some of our most sacred traditions, such as Jazz Fest or Bayou Boogaloo, you name it. And for us, while that might be disappointing, for so many members of our community, in particular, those who are in the gig and hospitality industries, our culture bearers, artists, musicians, having no festival season is devastating financially and also for morale. For so many folks who get their purpose from interacting with the millions of tourists who come to New Orleans each year and embrace our cultural experiences here. And so there's so many different angles through which I could talk about coronavirus, but I'm going to be focusing primarily on the economic development and placemaking angles. A little bit about myself. Thanks, Nicole, for the intro earlier, but I studied urban studies at Columbia University with a focus on social psychology as well as human-centered design. I wrote my thesis on how social media was changing architecture and the built environment around the world, and came to New Orleans with the entrepreneurial-focused Venture for America program. I worked in economic development for a little over 2 years with the New Orleans Business Alliance, and then was inspired to start my own community economic development initiative called Big Easel Collective, which works with local artists to connect them to commercial and residential clients who are looking for immersive art experiences to enhance their space and their brand identity. And as an urban studies major, you know things are bad when the New York Times is questioning, can city life survive coronavirus? And the reason for that is, as all of us are doing our own version or adaptation of this moment, we are not doing a lot of other things. We're not shopping, we're not using public transit, and many of us are struggling to pay rent and make ends meet. And so while we all make our small decisions each and every day about how to navigate life, the impact on our cities have been huge. I'm going to start with some macroeconomic data, and then I'm going to drill down a little bit into how this moment is affecting Main Street and some smaller businesses. So this is a chart comparing March 11th to March 4th. And this is, as you see, when coronavirus cases are upticking in various cities, the foot traffic has changed significantly. So we're seeing a drop of 1/3. And we've also seen this mirrored in data about driving and car usage around cities as well. This other chart from The Economist shows how drastically our retail landscape has changed between January and April of this year. You can see all of these various industries not only saw a huge drop in employment, but also saw a huge drop in retail sales. Very few industries are actually doing well in this moment. And the retail sales actually results in about 20% drop when comparing those timeframes, and 33.5 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefit. Those are numbers that we have not seen since the Great Depression. And to drill down a little bit about what that might look like, I'm going to pull in some survey information from Main Street America, which works with a variety of different small business owners around the country. And you can get a little bit of a snapshot of where the data is coming from this screen. And in New Orleans, you know, we have a lot of small and local businesses. So these stories, I feel like, really will echo in our landscape in particular. 34% of businesses generated no revenue in April, and 35% had laid off or furloughed their entire staffs. That's unprecedented and quite scary to think about how that is unfolding in the lives of our neighbors and friends. You can see this is the survey results that most companies saw revenues decrease between 50 and 100%. 7.5 million small businesses are at risk of closing permanently in the next 5 months, and 3.5 million are at risk in the next 2 months. 78% of businesses applied for federal funding, but only 48% received relief. Those that tended to be on the smaller side of the spectrum with fewer than 6 employees received even less relief. So it's not necessarily helping everyone in this moment that so many folks are looking for support. And each one of these is a story. It's a business owner that is struggling to make ends meet. And so many of us no longer have the community connections that we turn to for support as a result of coronavirus and isolation. We don't even have our neighborhood bars to turn to for a drink. And business owners are desperate. They are really needing to start generating revenue, but are paralyzed to figure out the path forward given our pandemic and the moment that we are in. And for many folks, operating at 50% or less capacity isn't financially viable for their business. Particularly restaurants, those margins make it very challenging to survive. And so we need to be thinking about how we can redesign our city structures. Because in our current moment, our lifestyle and our spaces are at odds with our health. And we're weighing this constant back and forth between our lives and our livelihoods. What should we prioritize? What is the right path forward? And in this balance is the lives of our friends, neighbors, frontline workers, you name it. And so many cities are not prepared for this moment. But also, if you focus on stores themselves, so many stores are not designed for this moment as well. Cities grew out of a need for deeply human connection. We're looking for social, spiritual, economic connections from the relationships that we share. Our streets, shared housing, and public spaces are an expression of our collective affirmation, this idea that we're all in it together. And pandemics prey on this. They are anti-urban. The social distancing runs up against our fundamental desire to interact, and also the way that we have built our cities and plazas. Festivals, subways, and skyscrapers are all designed to be occupied and animated collectively. And for many urban systems to work properly, density is the goal, not the enemy. And so we're in this moment where we're really questioning how everything is unfolding and what the path forward looks like. And if you take an example of something like a grocery store, grocery stores are not designed to be efficient. You know, we all have that experience where we go into the store, we have the 11 things that we need. We're gonna go in, out, and back in the car. And you see the same person wandering around 30 minutes later, eyes glazed over, admiring how many different flavors of Pop-Tarts that exist, you know? And that's because grocery stores and so many of our spaces throughout the city are designed to be disorienting. They want you to spend more time in there and therefore more money. And so ultimately, you know, this is really working against our public health moment that we find ourselves in right now. And this even plays out in our public spaces. Parks are designed to have benches with 6 people sitting together and people enjoying our paths and trails. And as we turn to nature more than ever in this moment, we're also struggling with how to succeed in this moment. And we might remember to keep a safe distance sometimes, but we're going to fail a lot. And that has serious consequences in this pandemic. We won't even realize how much we're failing because often we're acting unconsciously. And in this presentation, we're going to explore some solutions to these mistakes, how we can physically create cues in order to protect ourselves and our public health. So I'm going to start off with just some basic resources that are great for everyone to know no matter where they're at. So this is a great story that came out this week, and I think we can all be bolstered by this. 2 hairstylists were infected with COVID-19. They treated 140 customers who are also wearing masks, and none of them got COVID. And so first and foremost thing is go wear your mask. I think a lot of folks in New Orleans were talking about if you're at a party and one person shows up wearing glitter, everyone will have glitter on them by the time they leave the party. And that's what we need to think about with the germs as they pertain to this virus. And so the CDC has a ton of different guidelines that you can use as an initial starting point. There's guides for communication, cleaning, worker safety, and support. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is we are in the middle of a global pandemic. People are dealing with this in so many different ways, and a lot of folks are struggling, in particular through the mental health experience of this moment. And so another great section is around this coping and resilience element. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our staff, and our staff is family members to us. And so making sure not only that they have protective equipment to be able to do their job safely, but also that you're checking in and making sure that their mental health needs are being met, and that you're adequately dealing with the new stressors as a result of this moment. The CDC actually has safety steps for specific occupations. So depending on what industry you're in, whether that be construction or driving a car for Uber, you name it, there's some great tips and tricks for how to maximize our wellness in this moment. But these are pretty basic guidelines. And there's a huge difference between passive sanitization and concrete social distance strategy. Passive sanitization is not going to be enough in this moment and for our new normal that may extend for an indefinite period. We need to come up with concrete social strategies so that we can make people feel comfortable in our spaces and protect everyone who's engaging with our business, our office, our space, you name it. And so that's what the rest of this presentation is going to focus on, some implementation strategies that are being spearheaded around the world, and hopefully will provide some great inspiration for you, your friends, your colleagues, and any spaces that you might be managing. To give you a little outline of what to expect for this presentation, I'm going to start with a little bit about what is placemaking. I'm going to start on the smallest scale and talk about some store-based interventions, build up to the neighborhood level, and then explore what some cities are doing for more comprehensive reform across their regions. New Orleans always has its own unique way of doing things, so we'll look at some businesses that are using innovative strategies here in the city, talk about some digital strategies, and then close out with some future prospects. So with that, I hope y'all are ready. So, what is placemaking? Placemaking is both an overarching idea and a hands-on approach for improving a neighborhood, city, or region. Placemaking inspires people to collectively reimagine and reinvent public spaces that are at the heart of every community. Strengthening the connection between people and places they share, placemaking refers to a collaborative approach by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize our shared values. More than just promoting better urban design, placemaking facilitates creative patterns of use, paying particular attention to the physical, cultural, and social identities that define a place and support its ongoing evolution. With community-based participation at its center, an effective placemaking process capitalizes on a local community's assets, inspiration, and potential, and results in quality public spaces that contribute to people's health, happiness, and well-being. This is from the Project for Public Spaces and just gives a little more vivid snapshot of what placemaking is and what placemaking is not. And this is another resource from the Project for Public Spaces that I really like. I'm happy to share more information on this with anyone following this presentation, so feel free to flag this for more info. But essentially, they break down the identity of place into 4 key attributes: uses and activities, comfort and image, access and linkages, and sociability. And so those come with a variety of intangible indicators, things like walkability, vitality, and friendliness. And then the measurable components that play into this, things like what is the cost of rent? What's the environmental data? What's the pedestrian activity? So there's ways to actually think about the interventions, the design aspects that we have in our cities and how they affect life. And with that, I'm going to jump into some store level placemaking. So we're going to start with some of these more informal strategies. This is in San Antonio at a fast food shop. Very simple, duct tape on the ground, keeping people 6 feet apart from one another. in a business school in Singapore, using their atrium to still allow for gathering, but making sure that the germs are limited in their spread. Elevators are going to be a huge challenge across the board. This is how IKEA has positioned folks so that they're not all breathing in the same direction. And in particular, for those with disabilities, there's no alternative like taking the stairs. And so this is definitely an area that we'll have to be focusing on and thinking creatively about. This is a cute little indicator. It's for a deli counter that only has a limited amount of seating with their new capacity. And so folks can come in and see whether or not they're able to take on more folks or if they've reached capacity. And something like this kind of also reminds you of like, this bathroom was last cleaned X. It just shows you that they're constantly thinking about it, that they're aware, and folks are looking for these signal clues so that they know that you as a business or office or institution is taking this moment seriously. This cue, a little bit more defined, but also pretty simple if you think about it. And so stuff like this can just be built with some basic duct tape. But if you don't want to get out that roll and get all sticky, there's also some amazing resources that you can find online. This is just from a quick Etsy search, but you can see that you can get some basic stickers and things like that at a very affordable rate, which is a great small intervention that can be made. But stores can also do a little bit more. They can bring their personality and their space needs into this design process as well, and think about what might be the best solution for their unique identity. This one's great. This is a really inexpensive way to go about creating some barriers. We all love our bartenders here in New Orleans, and I'm sure you do in your own neighborhoods, wherever you're calling in from. But these pipes and plastic wrap is a really simple way to still allow you to have that face-to-face interaction, but not spread the germs. A little bit more elegant. This is in Paris, and they've designed these individualized little tubes so that you can also have that shared experience over a meal safely. And in Amsterdam, this is probably the most elegant case of social distancing I've seen. Each table gets their own individual greenhouse to dine in, which is definitely pretty elegant. Some folks operating at limited capacity realize that it's a little awkward to eat dinner in an empty dining room. And so some folks have come up with creative solutions by adding mannequins to some of the tables that they're not using. And this is also interesting because if you're limiting the furniture that is being utilized, then you can make sure to sanitize and clean it effectively, and it's less lift for your staff members as well. This restaurant here, the Inn at Little Washington, is actually a Michelin star restaurant. So it goes to show no one is above design at the point of coronavirus. And in Bangkok, they've taken their own little twist on it. You can see these lovely pandas dining and keeping some distance between folks as well. And some businesses have not been able to open up yet, but that doesn't mean that they can't use their space as a way to encourage community members to build affinity and build loyalty to their brands. We can see different folks around the country utilizing their public signage to boost morale for some of our frontline workers. Next, we're going to evolve into the neighborhood level placemaking. And so if we have any folks who are calling in from, let's say, a Magazine Street Association, a downtown development district, a chamber of commerce, this is a section that will be particularly relevant to you and your constituents. I love this. This is in Raton, New Mexico. There's a town of only 6,000 or 7,000 people. And so coronavirus hit them real hard, and they realized that encouraging people to spend locally was essential in this moment. And so they created a cash mob, or sort of like a QVC, where they go store to store and help kind of mimic that experience of impulse shopping and discovering new wares. And for one business owner, they helped raise $2,200 in just a few hours. So this is an idea that could definitely be incorporated, and some cities have taken this concept and built on it. So if you look at Livermore, which is in California, they went store to store showcasing different wares and had a lot of great participation and allowed you to enjoy some of the best parts of staying at home during quarantine, like being in your pajamas. This was the Mayflower Initiative, where in California, a town had shops put up different expressions of flowers in their windows. And the idea behind this was not only to create some public art and show solidarity as a community, but it was also to draw folks into downtown to come take their outdoor time and outdoor strolls in the downtown region. They also built out a technological tool that allowed folks to click through each of the different shops, and in doing so, find out what their hours were. Are they doing pickup, delivery, and how their new normal was functioning as a result of coronavirus. In Evansville, Indiana, they set up these hand washing sanitization stations throughout their downtown areas. And I imagine this is something we'll be seeing a lot of if we start migrating back to having some larger gatherings and festivals. But this is also something that could be implemented in some of our retail corridors as well. And then this is a great initiative as well that was out of Michigan. Essentially, this is the idea to teach people to start implementing some of those social distancing strategy and supporting local shops. And so 6 different people won gift certificates to different shops downtown. And people took place in these various different activities, everything from finding local makers on Etsy to purchasing a gift card. And this was just a great way to boost morale and get folks sharing about the ways that they're adapting to this new normal. All right, now we're scaling back up. So we are on the city level placemaking. I'm going to start with some basic interventions and then go into some more comprehensive reform. So this is kind of like the bare minimum. This is a polling station in Wisconsin. They're just keeping people, defining the flow of traffic and keeping people distanced the best they can. A slightly more formalized strategy out of Denmark in one of their corridors. You can see here, public transit is going to be a huge area for redesign. We know so many of our hardworking RTA members in our community were affected with coronavirus, especially in this first wave. And so thinking about how we can best maximize space while realizing that folks still rely on public transit to get to work and access their essential jobs. And so this is an example of how they were doing that in Colombia. Negotiating with parking vendors, which we all know can be challenging, but this was done in Oklahoma City and shows how different restaurants have partnered to allow for pickup zones that make the experience of ordering from a restaurant just smoother and simpler, and ultimately will generate more revenue. In New York City, this isn't great, but it does illustrate what 6 feet is, which I think some of us tend to forget. And having that visual cue is something real nice. But something that's even nicer is some more thoughtful, comprehensive design strategies. This is super cool. This is in Domino Park in New York City. So New York obviously has very high density and tons of residents that are seeking out public spaces. And we all know how important our local green spaces have become in this moment. It's such a vital part of our mental health and wellness to be able to go out and get some sunshine and get some fresh air, leave our houses. And so in New York, there's such a high demand and much less surface area in which to do it. And so these little circles indicate how far away groups should be from one another and households, and also allows people to use this space with maximum efficiency. This concept was also adopted in San Francisco. They implemented this around 4 different parks throughout their city. And it's not just in the US. Here, outside of Florence, is a public plaza where they've mimicked the same experience. And it also is just a good reminder when you see visual cues like this, your mind is constantly thinking about how close are we, how far apart are we, and how can we stop the spread of this disease. Some design studios are coming up with some other intervention possibilities. So you can see here these tuck under tiles that are found in cities all around the country, and just create another space for folks to sit and rest and maintain their safety. Next, we're going to get into some of the policy changes. So this is not just about like simple design solutions, but how we can be rethinking our streets and our experience of cities overall. And so, bringing vitality to our shopping and dining districts is essential, because so much of that revenue also goes to support the city. And that sales revenue is going to create a huge crisis for cities all around the country. And without that revenue, we're really going to struggle to figure out how the path forward in New Orleans looks. So one example for conditional permitting in a pilot program was designed by Studio on 11. And so you can imagine this in some of our areas, but this is the concept of a parklet, which is when you take over parking zones in front of a restaurant and instead create an outdoor corridor through which restaurants can expand their capacity, and also allow people to be outside, which we all know limits the spread of the disease when compared to indoor spaces. And they've set up a variety of other interventions in this concept, including a passerby zone for folks that are walking up and down the region, a waiting area where the spots are distanced 6 feet apart, sanitization stations, curbside pickup. And all of these indicators really will allow us to build capacity and do so in a way that is responsible. And Studio on 11 has built out some of these other parklets in California in the past, and they saw amazing results. On average, between their various activations, restaurants added 30 seats, hired 10 more employees, and had a 24% increase in sales. And to give you an idea of what one of these case studies actually looks like, if you see this store here, you can see not only do they benefit from the sidewalk dining and parklet activations, but these interventions here on the corner actually work to calm traffic and slow streets, which we all know is a really important initiative, especially as we have folks out on bicycles and on foot. We want to make sure that our streets are safe for our various residents. Another amazing strategy that was spearheaded in Lithuania to also increase the capacity of restaurants was taking over 18 different public plazas throughout the city. They got rid of the sidewalk dining restrictions and fees and allowed 160 restaurants to take part in this new program. They also gave the city's public health workers $450,000 in restaurant vouchers as a gesture of thanks and also as a much needed stimulus for the city's cafes. And plans to increase capacity are being proposed by the Downtown Development District. I haven't gotten an update from their team on what the current status is of this report, but if somebody knows, they can feel free to share in the Q&A period following this session. But you can see this is what some more seating could look like at the Ace Hotel in Maison de la Luz. Here at the Domain Restaurant tenant block. And another concept outside of the Palace Cafe. And we also know that many of these restaurants and businesses along Canal Street have not only been impacted by coronavirus, but also by the Hard Rock collapse. And so are in desperate need of some reform and strategies that can help them get back on their feet. And so with all of these, streets are at the heart of the reform. And some cities are thinking about how they can maximize their streets for this moment. Oakland, California has developed a slow streets program that has designated 74 miles of neighborhood streets to be open only to pedestrians, bikes, wheelchair users, and local vehicles. And so, this also talks about the density and how much we're using our outdoor spaces in new ways. And just, we are circulating around the city a little bit less. And so thinking about areas that this could be strategic in New Orleans is also worthwhile. New York, always one to be checking out California and seeing what they can adopt, are also considering opening 100 miles of New York City slow streets. They're also considering additional legislation to prevent commercial and residential tenants from rent evictions. They're considering additional pay for grocery store workers through a new stimulus round. They're offering paid sick leave for delivery workers, and they're suspending sidewalk cafe fees for restaurants. So a couple other things that are unfolding in cities all around the world. But New Orleans is unlike any other city in the world. And so I'm just going to go through a couple examples of interventions and strategies that are being spearheaded locally in New Orleans and how we are responding to the moment that we found ourselves in. This is a great little intervention that was done at Mojo Coffee House by artist Caroline Thomas. These indicators have amazing curb appeal and also show folks where they should be standing in line to maintain that responsible distance. If I was just out on my neighborhood walk getting some fresh air and saw this, I would really have to fight hard to resist the temptation to get a latte. And something like this really brightens up the moment that we're in and is a great idea and adaptation that we can all think about how to do it in our own voice and for our own businesses. She Comes in Peace Hair Salon, a very trendy spot. They've hung up these great dividers to limit the spread of germs and have also spaced out their different stations. Many folks are turning to Yelp and other digital strategies in order to adequately space out timing between tables and make sure that they have the time they need to sanitize effectively between customers. Josh Wingerter is a local pop artist who received a lot of acclaim as he went around some of the boarded restaurants in bars down on Frenchman Street and put up some pop icons, such as Audrey Hepburn, Frida Kahlo, the Hubix Pie Man, Cam Jordan, Dr. John, you name it. And this was just a great way to boost morale for many folks who in this moment feel really desolate. And, you know, there's so many musicians that otherwise would be filling these spaces and windows with joy. And so this adaptation allowed them to bring some smiles to our neighborhood. The Plywood Project New Orleans has connected local artists with mini grants to put up art in some of other boarded up shops around the city. This piece was done by Sam, Zach, and Bruna. And the Front Porch Project. Jill Marie Photography has gone around and taken free portraits of a bunch of New Orleans folks, and in return asks that they support a local business or restaurant of their choosing. There's 500 folks that have been registered on her list, and she's captured over 90 of them so far. And this is a great moment that we can all feel great about. That same Main Street America survey had an open-ended question asking folks about the community response in this moment. And you can see, even though it's been a trying time, there's been overwhelming experiences of positivity and strength. You see those words like community and supportive and helpful. And so we're all trying to do our part to support the institutions and businesses that we care about in this moment. And, you know, we can lean on each other and lean on our neighbors. And we've seen all around the world folks galvanize to bring positivity in this moment of darkness. But not all of us have that capacity. For some of us, it can feel hard to move forward, to feel that forward momentum. And some days we kind of just feel like we are failing across the board. This is funny. These are some Barbies that a grandmother has been making, but you can see Quarantine Barbie comes with both daytime and nighttime pajamas, which is the fashion statement of the moment that we find ourselves in. I was saying that she's missing some wine bottles, and that has been another element of quarantine. You know, it used to be sad if you made yourself a pitcher of margaritas on, let's say, a Tuesday, but now staying at home is doing your part to strengthen our community and, you know, be cognizant of the public health moment that we're in. A lot of us are also doing a lot of this. I feel like I get into bed at 10 o'clock and I blink and I'm still scrolling on news sites or on social media and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's very natural for people to turn to their phones as in moments of anxiety, not only for information, but also to numb some of those discomforts and anxieties that we're feeling internally. This flow of information just lulls us into a sense of security. And our days can sometimes feel like we're toggling between our phones, our laptops, and TVs on repeat. And while we're doing a lot of this actually does have big consequences in terms of how folks are engaging with brands online and how we're engaging with our business community. On social media platforms, as a result of coronavirus, we've seen a 61% increase in engagement across the board. And we've seen a 50% increase in messaging across Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp in countries hardest hit by the virus. There's a lot more website traffic, unsurprisingly, to Netflix and to Facebook. And all of this opens up the door for some digital strategies that we can be thinking about as well. In particular, I just want to indicate, like, if me and my housemates are thinking like, it's hot, we really want to go get a snowball, generally the first thing we'll do is pull up a company's Instagram page and see, are they open? What are their new hours? What's the 401 on how they're handling masks and all of those various initiatives? And so even if you're not an active social media user, it's great to at least have one post that sort of lays out where you guys are at, so that when folks are checking in, they have an idea of what to expect. There's a bunch of different ways that we can support local businesses in this moment. This is great just for all of us as consumers to know, everything from takeout and tips to grabbing a growler from local breweries. And in this moment, we all have different levels of resources at our disposal. And for many folks, they might not have the means to support your company financially, but that doesn't mean that they don't love you. And this is another thing that you can do, is encourage your fans and your visitors and customers to voice their support on social media in a way that will increase the visibility and reach of your business. You can see these are some easy strategies that will help position you for success on social media and help expand your outreach to your community. And so creating even signage in your space to do these actions can be really beneficial. I love this. This was designed by Online Optimism, a local digital marketing firm in town. It's just a way to tag some of your favorite spots around town that maybe you're missing in this moment. I also think that we're going to see a proliferation of Yelp reviews and maybe even Yelp categories that will allow users to report how well different companies are adapting to social distancing guidelines. So that's also something to be cognizant of in how you're responsibly moving through this moment. And another thing too is, as folks are staying closer to home, they're tending to go to their neighborhoods shop out as much. And so if you can become your neighborhood's #1 favorite business, there's a huge market share and opportunity to positioning yourself within that nuclear neighborhood. And for some people who can't open back up, there's ways to get creative about still voicing the ways that you contribute to your community. And one thing I love is NewOrleans.com has these virtual visits for various attractions throughout town. But people are doing this all over the world. And so in some ways, we feel really isolated in this moment. But in other ways, it has opened the world to us. There are dozens and dozens of museums, research centers, zoos, aquariums, you name it, that are opening their doors for virtual tours and asking for donations in return. This is a great way to get subject matter experts involved and to feel like you can have some momentum in this moment that can often feel stifling. And so looking forward, I'm going to give a few small predictions about what our new normal could look like in this last section. And so ultimately, I don't think that coronavirus will be the end of density in cities. If you look at some of the data that's been shared, some of the most dense cities in the world, such as Singapore, Hong Kong, and Seoul, have been the most effective at slowing the spread of coronavirus. And so instead, we need to think about how these changes will take hold. We've seen Facebook and Twitter allowing their employees to work from home forever. As a result of people spending more time in their home offices and realizing the efficiency and viability of this strategy. And so when we see that, I do believe that there'll be a lesser demand for office space across the board, but a greater demand for gathering spaces such as meeting rooms and conference rooms, as folks will still congregate for particular needs for brainstorming and client meetings and the likes. I also think this will mean more demand for bars and restaurants as we start meeting folks around our nuclear neighborhoods. And the space of the office takes less importance as folks have more flexible work schedules. In addition, bars, neighborhoods, parks, restaurants, trails, near our home environments will be frequented a lot more during the work week rather than just on weekends, and something else to think about with our mixed use developments and the lifestyles that folks will be adapting as a result of coronavirus. Something else around building design. Now, these ideas of spaces that promote optimal health are no longer nice to haves. They will become essential in the path forward. Our spaces can reflect our poor mental health. They can result in anxiety, stress, and depression because of the way that their elements are coming together. And so to limit the spread of disease, we can think about how we can incorporate ventilation, light, greenery, and natural materials to enhance the experience of a space. And this in particular will be important for landlords and investors and facility managers to think about. And cities that during the 1918 flu influenza, the ones that implemented social distancing for longer periods of time not only had lower mortality rates when compared to peer cities, but they also had higher employment gains over time. And so we got to keep fighting the good fight and hope that in doing so, our economic prospects will continue to grow as a result of this responsible path forward. And so something else I always remind myself is that wearing a mask when leaving the house is an act of love. And so that's just a small thing that we can do each and every day to look out for our neighbors and friends. So cities have survived through pandemics, natural disasters, financial collapses, and disinvestment in the past. City life has endured, and cities will continue to go on. It might not look or feel the same way that it always has, but we will be continued to be drawn to the experiences that call us. We'll find solace in our community in new forms and new fashions. We can take comfort in knowing that we have always adapted. This shared experience will be no different. Cities are hubs of innovation and collaboration and research, and in that there's so much hope. We'll look back at this time and we'll marvel. We'll feel sadness and confusion, but also feel inspiration and love. And ultimately, we will lean on our continued resiliency because we have something worth fighting for. We have the love of our families, friends, and neighbors. We have the magic that New Orleans constantly reveals to us. We'll take care of each other and support one another, and we'll get through this as we always have. And if you're looking for support in your journey to safeguard your space and community, feel free to reach out. A huge part of our mission at Big Easel Collective is to empower artists and connect them to meaningful design projects. So many artists are still hurting from losing festival season and tourism season as well. They're eager to roll up their sleeves and realize your creative vision. We can build spectacular parklets, social distancing signals, murals, you name it. So feel free to reach out. And I just want to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to our first responders who have worked tirelessly to keep us safe and secure during this period. Long nights, exhausting shifts, you all are our heroes across the board, from our delivery workers and sanitation workers to our hospital staff. There are not enough words to express our gratitude. And I also want to thank our local leaders in our Black community for guiding us with wisdom and vision for a more equitable path forward in this crucial moment. I have so much admiration for the brilliant minds that this city holds. So thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing to keep us on the path towards a brighter future. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for this presentation on placemaking in the wake of COVID-19. It's been a delight, and I guess with that, we'll transition into questions. All right. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to either throw them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and send them my way. All right, so one of the questions that we have here is, will the city relax the fee for sidewalk seating? That's something that I'm hoping will happen, and Downtown Development District has been working on a concrete plan for this proposal. They have also implemented some of those best practices that I pointed out around Lithuania. as, onus to have this new policy change adapt. I haven't heard any concrete strategies, but we all know going forward into summer, we have a short window in which to activate on this. So hopefully it will take place soon. Drew asked, what do you think about the spread of COVID through touchscreens? Yes, this is a very interesting moment that we're in terms of technology. We see so many folks at Walmart and CVS opting for self-checkout because it's less human-to-human interaction. But we also don't know what the disease and spread is on the different machines that we're relying on in this moment. I always say, don't leave the house without a few sanitizing wipes, and I will wipe them down myself, because ultimately you are responsible for your own health. And even though we want to think the best of our companies that are putting this technology forward, we can't rely on them to safeguard us from the various other users who are utilizing their space. And something I kind of mentioned offhand, but if you want to create that experience of psychological safety for your visitors, put up cues. How frequently are you cleaning your spaces? Can you make signage for that? Can you brag about it and be excited about it and make them feel that every time they come to your business and grab a cup of coffee, that they're going to be better because of it, and that they know that you're taking the health of your family and all the people associated with your life seriously. Margie asked, are physical distancing practicing emerging for festivals? Great question, and one of my favorite things to be thinking about. Festivals are definitely an area that's ripe for intervention. I'm sure we've all seen our own areas of virtual festivals, and also Festing in Place, which was a new experience for so many of us New Orleanians. I do think that there's a huge opportunity for festivals to adapt. They're outdoor spaces, and there are ways that we could design spaces that are, more augmented. Perhaps they're color coded with various tickets. So you can get tickets that are in the red circle zones that are a little closer to the screen or to the stage or further out. And something I also like to think about is silent discos. If you guys have ever heard about people going out and everyone gets their own set of headphones, you can toggle through different DJs that are playing live in different booths and venues around the space. There's a way that everyone can get their own unique sound experience while staying away from their neighbors. And so I also think that using that silent disco technology is another huge area where we could see festivals regain some of their form and also adapt to the moment that we're in. Landon asks, do you see trends in who is financing these interventions? Does city government typically help at all? Downtown districts, small business support organizations, or do businesses typically pay for everything themselves? This really depends on where the business falls within the neighborhood structure. I do think that organizations such as the Magazine Street Association and Downtown Development District have the means and capabilities to implement some of those neighborhood level strategies that we talked about. I think ultimately cities will have to determine what their path forward looks like, but their revenues are really going to be shot by this moment, which makes that really challenging. I think that the best position for cities is to be thinking about their ordinances and how they can make some shifts there that empower people to empower themselves. And we can also think about, are there creative nonprofits that can emerge that will help support some of these smaller businesses? And in some instances, like acquiring new seating for outdoor seating and things like that, generally I've seen that fall on businesses themselves. But if there are other, magnet institutions, such as, the Mid-City Center, downtown, or Canal Place, those institutions may think about how small improvements could ultimately benefit all of their tenants and therefore create their revenues, allow their revenues to be more sustainable overall. Please excuse me if I mispronounce your name, but Giaquino asked, as someone who is very familiar with New York City and now lives in New Orleans, do you think that the placemaking measures being taken due to COVID, such as closing down slow streets and more outdoor seating, will be normalized for New York City even after COVID? Do you see New York City adapting to be more like a city like New Orleans that's pedestrian friendly? I think so. I think that There has been forward momentum for that for a long time. New York City has had Vision Zero for a while, which is all about slowing streets down. And even earlier this year, when they were shutting down the L and thinking about interventions for how to increase accessibility along 14th Street, they also considered adding in slow streets across all of 14th Street in Manhattan, which would mean that there's no cars besides buses, bicycles, individuals, and delivery trucks. And so if we could do something like that in 14th Street during this moment and see the efficacy of it, many of these tactile design interventions may become permanent. And we see that across the board in New York City. That's also how Times Square began as a pop-up installation to see what it would be like to just close that down to vehicular traffic. And now that's a permanent installation that has really done so much to boost the economic, outcomes of that area overall. Okay. Blake said, as a follow-up to the above question, are there cities domestically or internationally that are standout leaders in placemaking? Yes, there are so many places that are doing this really well. I think in particular with social distancing, Singapore is a place with incredible density and public spaces that also has done an amazing job at limiting the spread of COVID across the board. I love the example of Lithuania, that not only are they retaking their public plazas, but that they're giving their frontline workers restaurant vouchers for a much needed stimulus boost. So I think that those are some places that are doing it really well, and we'll continue to see who are the winners and losers of the way that they're handling the situation, because the data doesn't lie, and we'll be able to continue to monitor which places are working well throughout this moment. Andrea asked, do you think shared bicycles will be brought back? The blue bikes loss has been devastating to me personally, I'm sure to many. I was still utilizing blue bikes with my hand sanitizing wipes and gloves like throughout the beginning of COVID, using it to ride up to the lake. We just got our e-bikes, and it's tragic that we lost them as a result of jump bikes being sold from Uber to Lime. There is talks that they're going to talk about a path forward to bring back our e-bike sharing program, but I haven't heard any concrete strategies. And ultimately, I'm a big believer in public-private partnerships, and I was so optimistic about the future of bike shares for our city, which is such a bike-friendly, flat existence. But I haven't heard anything concrete yet about what that could look like. So I'm not going to hold my breath on it. And I am still in need of tuning up my own bike, but I'm going to miss that electric motor on the blue bike system for sure. Manuel said, whiskey in a teacup instead of wine for quarantine Barbie. I'm in favor of that. iPhone asked, any thought on the future of co-working spaces? Yeah, so I think co-working spaces is going to be a really interesting frontier as well. I think there's going to be a proper balance of sanitizing the space and having that fall upon the responsibility of the space managers and the co-working brand, but also every person is going to have to do their own responsible path forward. We're now seeing these like disposable immediate temperature checks. I think that those will be essential for everyone who's trying to come in and use the co-working space to make sure they're asymptomatic. I think also, instead of the normal way that co-working has existed, that people can spread out and take advantage of all the different spaces, it might make sense to designate particular areas primarily for X list of tenants, and instead of having everyone flow freely, have different regions that folks are more focused around. But definitely going to be a challenging industry to bounce back, as we've seen from WeWork and some other folks that ultimately are struggling through this moment. But I think we'll also see folks, as they work more remotely, maybe looking for that home office alternative, and perhaps fleeing to co-working spaces as coronavirus gets more under control. But only time will tell, and ultimately it'll be up to co-working spaces to get to that point to see what the viability of that path forward is. Michael asked, what have you seen about encouraging mask use and removing the onus on retail workers for enforcing their use? What kinds of appeals do you think might be effective? That's a great question. I know something that is effective for me is having a mask that I'm excited about wearing. I have a couple that are like pretty glitzy and fun. And I think New Orleans, if we can get to Mardi Gras 2021, we'll have some pretty great twists as well. For me, I've seen some data. I'm sure you guys have seen that chart about the transmission rates, but I wasn't able to verify the data on that, so I didn't present it. But ultimately, we do know that if two people are wearing masks, the rate of transmission is significantly reduced. And I think different people will respond to different motivational cues in that moment. For me, I like to think about putting on my mask as an act of love for the people I care about. And even though it's awkward and cumbersome, it's ultimately, I think, the right thing when you're going out and into the community, particularly if you're in indoor spaces. And I do think it's important for retailers to set the bar and say that they will not allow people into their business without a mask. I've seen this across the board in New Orleans. I think it's the right thing, not only for the staff members that are part of your family and part of your team, but also for the different folks that are utilizing your space. And that psychological safety of going into a space that you know is taking it seriously is crucial, and ultimately will allow me to be more brand loyal to a particular business. Maddie asked, have you seen any particularly innovative strategies in places made for kids, like schools, playgrounds, camps, even like toy stores? That's a great question, and definitely something I could research some more in. We've seen that our parks have started reopening playgrounds and the like, and that definitely makes me nervous because we all know that kids tend to be asymptomatic carriers of coronavirus. I think that, hopefully we can rely on parents to make sure that they're sanitizing their hands, but I don't have my own children, and I am, my heart goes out to all the folks that are managing the health of so many folks in their lives, including children. Yeah, schools are going to be a huge frontier. I think temperature checks are going to be essential and mandatory, and ultimately also some of those concepts I was talking about with co-working spaces, that kids are not going to be moving from classroom to classroom to go about their learning. I think we're going to have much more sedentary experiences, which I ultimately think is going to be challenging for a lot of students, and would be for me personally when I was back at school. So we'll see what happens and goes forward in that realm. And Maddie, I know that you're talking about some policy changes around our schools, and so maybe you can give us a teach-in down the line about what some of the great strategies and tactics are on that front. And I'd be happy, if anyone else is interested, to do some more research on that and circle back on them. Janet asks, speaking of retail, are there examples of retail? Of retailers out in. I think that we will probably see a greater proliferation of this. In the town I grew up in, we used to have these things in the summer called sidewalk sales, where folks would set up their inventory outside. And that something like that sounds really appealing in a moment like this. If you're walking along Magazine Street and you get to see what's out, see the wares, and do a little more of that impulse shopping rather than constantly putting your mask on and going inside shops and feeling like cramped and crowded. So I think, there's definitely models of folks who have done that in the past. And I think the opportunity is definitely ripe right now to have a little bit more of that, especially if you think about some folks like maybe around the mid-city market where there's a lot of walkability to the Macy's and some of those others, the Marshalls or what have you. We don't need all of those parking spots in a moment where we're just circulating less. And so there could definitely be some big moments and activations around that. And I like where your head is at, Janet, on that thought. iPhone asks, any thoughts on dating apps and how they'll set up for safe placemaking dates? Very interesting question. I have heard that various apps are encouraging people to not meet up for dates. I know that Hinge has implemented video chat dates, and I don't know if those are going particularly successfully or what people's thoughts are on that, but I think that COVID is going to be a very interesting time for the dating scene all around. And for so many different aspects of our life, including festivals, dining, retail, all of that, everything is up for new thoughts and new designs. So we'll see what the future of all of those various aspects look like. All right, y'all. Well, I want to be sensitive on time. I know we're going over, but I want to thank y'all so much for joining me today on this lecture for placemaking in the wake of COVID-19. I'm just going to throw my email address back in the chat in case anyone wants to get in touch, has additional questions that maybe they weren't able to ask. So feel free to reach out. I have an open door. Would love for you to stay in touch, engage us. If you want to think about some creative placemaking strategies for your business or space, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation around that. Really appreciate you all tuning in and for your great questions and attention. It's been an absolute delight sharing this moment with y'all. So thank you so much.